At 71, Robert rushed through the rain to the hospital, knowing it might be the last time he held Mary's hand. Headlights smeared across the wet road, wipers fought the storm, and his phone on the passenger seat glowed with the words that made his stomach drop. "Please come now." He gripped the wheel harder. "Hold on, Mary," he said to the empty car, voice thin and shaky. "Please, hold on." He pulled into the hospital too fast and braked hard. The sliding doors opened with a sigh, and he stepped into bright light and the smell of disinfectant. A nurse pointed him down a corridor. Another held the door at the end. He heard almost nothing but the heavy thud of his own heart. He reached the room and stopped, breath caught at the sight of her, smaller than he remembered, pale under the thin blanket, the steady beep of the monitor counting time he could not control. "Rob," she whispered, and even that single syllable held years of warmth. He went to her, took her hand with both of his, and felt the coolness of her fingers. "I'm here," he said. "I'm right here." He brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. For a while they said nothing. He told her small things because small things had always mattered between them. The rain, the traffic, the coffee he left half-finished on the counter. She listened like she always had, with attention that made the ordinary feel like treasure. A cough shook her chest. She tried to wet her lips, couldn't, and squeezed his fingers instead. "Rob," she said again, and the effort of saying his name pulled a deep ache through him. He leaned closer. "Don't let our dream die." It was barely a breath, barely a thread of sound, but it was clear. He knew exactly which dream she meant. The map. The red line. The promise of someday. He swallowed. "I won't," he said, though his voice wavered. "I promise." Her chest rose, then fell. She looked at him with that same mix of tenderness and mischief that had steadied him for 5 decades, and then her eyes closed. The beeping stretched into a long, flat note. A nurse touched his shoulder. The room did not weep or shout. It simply became a place where his hand was holding a hand that would never squeeze back. He didn't cry. Not yet. He sat very still, his thumb drawing a slow circle on her knuckles. He wanted one more story, one more shared joke about the time he burned the toast and blamed the toaster, one more quiet evening where he read the paper and she pretended not to read over his shoulder. When the nurse came to adjust the sheet, he let go because he had to, not because he was ready. The parking lot was slick when he walked out. The worst of the rain had passed, but drops still ticked on the hood of his car. He drove home slowly. Streetlights made puddles look like scattered windows. He thought about how in the morning he would pour 2 cups of coffee and then stand there, foolish and broken, watching steam rise from a cup no one would lift. The house had never seemed so large. He hung his coat and listened for the sound that would not come. Her humming in the kitchen, the soft thump of her step on the hall rug, the scrape of her chair as she sat to write a list. He turned on one lamp. The warm pool of light fell across her spot on the sofa and the knitting basket by her feet. The scarf she'd been making had 3 inches left. He touched the yarn. It was still soft, still warm from the last time she set it down. In the morning, he filled the kettle and poured water over grounds the way he had every day for years. 2 mugs waited on the counter because habit is stubborn. He slid one toward the side of the sink where she liked to stand. The steam curled and faded. He picked up his own cup and sat at the table. He took a sip and put the cup down, then reached across without thinking as if to move her spoon aside, as if she might bump it with her elbow and laugh at herself. His fingers closed around air. Calls came. He put the phone on speaker and listened to love from kind people who could not stand with him in the empty rooms. Neighbors brought food in foil pans. Heat it at 350, they said, as if the oven knew how to fix the hollow ache in a man's chest. His son said, "Dad will help. Anything." His daughter talked about the grandchildren and about the service and about the way Mom always tucked a paper napkin under her coffee mug like it mattered. He said thank you. He meant it. When the door closed and the phone went quiet, the silence returned, steady and heavy and patient. He tried to nap in the afternoon, but the bed felt like a place where the shape of her absence was cut into the mattress. He got up and walked the house, touching objects like you'd touch stones in a river. The picture from their 25th anniversary where his tie was crooked and she slanted it straight with 2 fingers. the seashell she kept from a beach where they'd ended up after getting lost on a Sunday drive, the cookbook with pencil notes in the margins, less sugar next time, and a small smudge of flour that he couldn't bring himself to wipe away. On the fourth evening, the light went gold, then gray. He stood at the bottom of the attic stairs and stared up. The pull chain for the bulb dangled like a question. He climbed slowly. The bulb flickered, then held. Dust lit in the cone of light. He coughed and nearly smiled at the sound because Mary would have told him to wear a mask and he would have said he didn't need one and she would have made him wear it anyway. Cardboard boxes lined the floor. He opened one and found an old sweater of his, the elbows shiny, the collar bent just so. He held it to his face and smelled laundry soap and something that might have been last winter. Another box revealed photo albums. He sat cross-legged and opened the first. There they were, 2 kids in a worn-out apartment, crooked blinds, paint peeling, both of them smiling like fortune had just knocked. He turned pages, a picnic where ants discovered the potato salad, a graduation where he held a bouquet because he didn't know what else to do with his hands, a Thanksgiving turkey that came out dry and was eaten anyway with gravy and laughter, a beach day when he sunburned his nose and she wore a hat and teased him for a week. He closed the album and slid it aside. Something long and rolled slipped forward, tied with brittle string. He knew what it was before he touched it. His fingers stilled. Then he reached and pulled it close and untied the string. The paper cracked a little as he unrolled it. He flattened it with his palms. There it was, America drawn in faded colors, a red line arcing from east to west like a heartbeat. Small circles marked small towns, the kind that didn't make headlines but did make memories. A bakery she'd read about in a travel magazine, a diner a musician had named in a song, a bridge somebody's cousin swore looked like a painting at sunset. Along the margins, in her tidy script, the notes that made him close his eyes. Stop here, cobbler. Jazz on Sundays. He'll love the record shop. Ask about the lighthouse. The map wasn't a plan so much as a conversation that had lasted years. They had called it the someday trip. Someday when the kids were out of school. Someday when work eased. Someday when they weren't as tired. Someday when time felt like something they owned again. Someday is a word people use like a drawer. They put things in it to keep them safe. He had believed there would be more drawers. At the center of the map she had drawn a circle in red ink and written a single word. Someday. Robert sat back on his heels. He didn't weep. He stopped breathing and then started again, slower. The attic wood creaked. A car passed in the street outside and its sound came to him like a reminder that the world had not paused just because his had. He pressed his fingertips to the red circle and felt the strange, cruel truth that ink can last longer than breath. Mary, he said, and his voice did not echo. You left before someday came. In the quiet, he heard her again, not as a sound in his ear but as a memory that did not fade. Don't let our dream die. The words had been small in the hospital, but up here under a low ceiling and a weak light, they filled the space. He stared at the map a long time. Fear arrived with its list. You are 71. Your knee aches in the morning. You are careful backing out of the driveway because your neck doesn't turn the way it used to. You like your chair and your routine. You have never changed a tire alone on a dark road in Nebraska. You have never slept in a parking lot in Arizona. You have never woken in a strange place and remembered you are the only person who knows where you are. Another list rose to meet it. Mary's laugh when a plan went wrong. The way she found friendly people in every town. The fact that Pi had been a part of their marriage for so long it might as well have been a witness at the wedding. The times they'd pointed at a map for no other reason than to say, how about here? The promise that had seemed small when they made it and enormous now that she was gone. He stood and his knees popped and he didn't care. He rolled the map carefully and carried it down the stairs. On the kitchen table he spread it again and smoothed the corners. The yellow pad he kept by the phone waited, and he picked up a pen because picking up a pen had always been the way he started things. He wrote, oil change. Spare tire. First aid kit. Cooler. Flashlight. Batteries. Road atlas. Mary would laugh. He paused and added, call the kids. He looked at that last line and felt his chest tighten. He loved them and they loved him, but he could already hear his son's careful voice. Dad, maybe wait a bit, and his daughter's worry, It's a lot to take on, aren't you tired? He wasn't angry at their concern. He had taught them to be careful. But he also remembered teaching them something else, that you do not break a promise just because it is hard. He pinned the map to the corkboard in the living room, the place where recipes and reminders and dentist appointments used to go. The red line shone under the lamp like a path someone had drawn in the air. He stepped back. For a moment the room felt less like a museum and more like a station where trains still arrived and left on time. He made soup for dinner. He burned his tongue because he didn't wait long enough for it to cool, and she would have told him to be patient, and he would have pretended not to hear. He smiled at the thought, and then the smile broke because the person who would have rolled her eyes at him kindly was not in the room. Later, in the quiet, he took a small notebook from a drawer. Mary had used it for grocery lists and birthdays. On the inside cover, in her quick, tidy hand, she had written, "Go slowly. See everything. Be kind." He traced each word with a fingertip like a blessing. He did not sleep in their bed that night. He lay on the couch with the lamp on low, the map visible from where he rested, so that if he opened his eyes in the dark he would see not just the shape of loss but the shape of the road. A train sounded far off, a low ribbon of noise moving through the night. He pictured a tiny light at the front of it and felt, for the first time in days, something steady move inside him. Morning came gray and quiet. He dressed, tied his shoes, and stood in the driveway looking at his car. It was fine, reliable, familiar. It was also not the right shape for what he imagined. In his mind he saw a small RV, not a big house on wheels, just something simple that could carry an old man and a promise. He laughed at himself because the idea felt too big and because he could imagine Mary standing beside him with a hand on her hip saying, "Robert, think it through," and then smiling because she knew he would, and also knew he might go anyway. He called his son. They talked about the service and the bills and a box of winter clothes that needed sorting. He didn't mention the map. Not yet. He wasn't hiding, he was building the right words. He called his daughter and listened to the sound of grandchildren in the background and held the phone away a little when one of them shrieked with delight over a cereal prize. He said he loved them all and meant it so deeply his throat hurt. The next hours were slow and busy at once. He found the old thermos that had gone on fishing trips and soccer games. He tested a flashlight and replaced the batteries. He folded 2 blankets into a neat square and stacked them in the hall. He opened the bottom drawer of the buffet and touched the stack of maps that had lived there since before phones learned to talk. He picked up one and laughed at himself again and kept it because Mary would have insisted on a backup. In the afternoon, he sat at the table and let himself remember the day they first drew the red line. The kids were still at home. They were practicing the habit of dreaming out loud at the end of long weeks. He had said, "What if we go west and just keep going until water tells us to stop?" And she had said, "Only if we stop for pie in places that don't brag about it." And he had said, "Deal," and she had taken a red pen from the drawer and touched it to the map like a blessing. They had found names they'd never heard and decided those would be their favorites. They had pointed to small roads that ran parallel to faster ones and agreed they'd rather go slow and see what the fast road missed. The sun moved across the floor. He made tea and drank it without tasting it. He walked to the cork board and stood very close, so close his breath moved the edge of the paper. The red circle around someday held his gaze. He remembered the hospital, the beeping, the weight of her hand in his. He remembered the words that had been her last gift. "Don't let our dream die." He said it out loud to make it real. "Mary, I heard you." The room did not answer, but it felt less empty. "I won't let our dream die." He knew the cost. He knew his age and his limits. He knew that a body could ache in new ways on a strange bed. He knew there would be nights when the road would feel like a long, cold corridor and he would miss the sound of her turning a page, miss it so much he would have to put his book down and sit with his eyes closed until the wave passed. He knew he might fail. But he also knew the worst failure would be to do nothing and let ink be the last place their promise lived. He placed both hands flat on the map. He closed his eyes and breathed. "Mary," he said softly, "I'm going to do it. No matter what it takes." Outside, evening settled. The night pressed against the windows as if the world itself had paused, waiting to see whether he would move or stay. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere a television flickered. In his living room, a red line held steady under a lamp. He picked up the yellow pad and wrote 3 more words at the bottom of his list. Find the RV. He set the pen down and stood there, listening to the house breathe. The refrigerator kicked on. The clock on the wall ticked. He felt his heart answer it, tick for tock, not faster, not louder, but sure. Would Robert truly begin this journey? Could a man of 71 carry both grief and promise across miles of unknown road? Would his children understand, or try to stop him? And what would the first town on that red line feel like when he reached it alone for the first time? That answer will come in the next chapter of his story. If Robert's promise touched you, don't leave yet. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe so you won't miss episode 2 of Robert's journey. His road is only beginning, and the next step will change everything.